Welcome to the Simple and Deep podcast. I'm your host, Wysteria Edwards. This podcast is dedicated to helping you understand attachment, engage your story, and live with intention. Let's get started. Welcome back to Simple and Deep. I'm your host, Wysteria Edwards, and I am thrilled to finally get back in the swing of things. I know that there's been a huge hiatus, but I have so many great and amazing things I wanted to share with you. First of all, my new book, Waiting for Mr. Rogers, is finally available for pre-order anywhere books are sold. That's again, Waiting for Mr. Rogers, Teaching with Attachment, Attunement, and Intention. And I wanted to give you a little recap of what this has been like for the last 2 years, because writing a book is less than glamorous. For those of you who think that there's beautiful, amazing book tours and people are laying out the red carpet for you, that's really not what writing a book is about. Writing a book is about basically giving birth to another child, a place where you lay yourself out bare, where you try to bring all of your thoughts together into a cohesive place where people are able to look within you and see where they could possibly find some connection, some growth, or some opportunities for themselves. So I wanted to give you a little bit of background of where I came from writing this book, and then maybe perhaps answer some questions that you might have about whether or not it's a good fit for you. So let's go back in time to about 2018, when I moved from a very low income, actually 100% poverty, to about 70% poverty, which seemed like a massive leap to another world. I had a PTA. I had parents that were hovering in my space versus people that were working 3-4 jobs just to make ends meet. I had the opportunity to just go home and spend time with my own children and not have to worry about whether or not I had children that were going to eat every night. I wasn't buying dry shampoo. I wasn't strapping my own financial means when it comes to purchasing food, clothing, anything and everything. I was known to be sticking many different things inside backpacks during Christmas. And that was just giving me a ton of what we call secondary trauma. So in my book, I talk about the fact that at one point I'm sitting with my mentor and she was watching me bawl my eyes out. And she said to me, Wisty, you are traumatizing and abusing yourself with your job. And oftentimes when you're in places of service-related fields, whether they're medical, teaching, whatever that might be, even pastoring, we have this opportunity to do some incredible things, right? To fill other people's buckets, to pour our lives into other people, but at the expense of our own selves. And there's a huge push for what we call quote unquote self-care. But self-care isn't a bunch of bubble baths and drinking a glass of wine. It's really understanding where you start and end and what you are responsible for. And we have really lost our vision when it comes to this sort of thing, because those of us who suffer from insecure attachment and our way of receiving and giving love will always serve to a place where we are absolutely depleted at our own expense. So I was at that place. So I took a chance and I applied for another position, bringing me to this place of PTAs and a building that was about 5 years old. And I felt like I had given myself the greatest gift. I was able to breathe. I was able to sleep well. And I was able to just kind of get to a place where I could focus on different things in my life. Meeting my own children. They were in late middle school, beginnings of high school. And we just didn't want to miss out on that anymore. Now my boys are 22 and 20, but at that time, I just wanted to, reintroduce myself to them, understand who I was and where I was going as a mother, as well as an educator. So the first year was pretty easy. I didn't have any major behavior problems. It seemed like everything was very smooth sailing. Fast forward to the second year, and a little boy who I named in my book Blue Eyes entered my classroom. And I wanted to give you a little inside view of him from the book itself. and then you'll have an idea of where we're going with the story. I'm emotionally in a pretty good place as I watch Blue Eyes walk down the hall towards me at the kindergarten meet and greet. His mother, 8 months pregnant, shuffles a short distance behind him. His blonde hair is so light that it looks white, and he has crystal blue eyes and numerous freckles sprinkled across his nose. Puffing out his chest, he reminds me of rapper Eminem, trying to sag his jeans and bump other students with his chest. He doesn't realize he's freshly 5 and not 23. One little boy begins to cry as his mother grabs the paperwork, obviously uncomfortable with the chest bump. She gives me a hasty goodbye and moves to leave as Blue Eyes turns his back, already forgetting the damage that he's caused. Blue Eyes' mother begins to relay a story that his father, recently paroled from jail on drug charges, will most likely relapse. Just keep an eye out on him and let me know if he seems high, she says to me. Fabulous. Blue Eyes walks around the room looking in cabinets, ramming cars together and doing karate chops in the carpet area. His energy feels out of place with the other children, who instantly seem like he could swallow them whole. His mother yells his name, causing him to stop and whine, "What?" Then she cusses for him to get over to her. Motioning to her stomach, I inquire about her due date. October, she says, and I make a mental note to write drop day on the calendar near his name because it's not going to be pretty. This one is different, my heart whispers to me. Tag, I am so not it, my colleague says, watching him walk away. Nope, that one is all mine, I reply. Mr. Rogers is a show for babies. I sit and look back at him amazed. 2 months into the school year, Blue Eyes is still determined to convince the world how tough he is, not needing anyone, and now he's attacking Mr. Rogers. A week earlier, I'd hit my limit. Unpredictable and bright, he could easily grow up to be someone who would pull off the biggest federal scam ever, only to retire in the Cayman Islands rich and undetectable. The street smarts on this kid are unparalleled, and I'm trying to stay at least one step ahead of him. He's just one of my many struggles with behavior. I also have Michael, who suffers from severe undiagnosed ADHD with ambivalent attachment and whose parents are divorcing. Michael needs to know where I am at every single minute of the day, refusing to sit in his seat, doing kung fu everywhere, and has little difficulty telling me, "I'm really, really mad at you, Mrs. Edwards," when I tell him no for the 5th time in a row. He's convinced that he can wear me down, which never works, much to his exasperation. After all, I'm a stubborn only child and I always win. Meanwhile, Blue Eyes intimidates all the other children. They avoid standing next to him in the line and switch to a different center if he sits down to join them. Each time I kneel at his level and try to instruct him, he looks over my shoulder and yells, "I don't care," startling the rest of the room into silence. He keeps me on my toes, and I regularly pray for him on my knees before school starts. Please, God. Ask any teacher and they can tell you about a child like him, the ones that we categorize as the walking wounded. Child psychologists would label them as ADD, ADHD, conduct disordered, oppositional defiant, the list goes on and on. They're the students who test every bit of our love, patience, grit, boundaries, and why some teachers need wine and chocolate at the end of the day. I'm just saying. He wants me to fail him. He waits for me to prove that I'm like everybody else. I am unpredictable or quick to leave, impatient and conditional. Something begins to shift in me the year that he becomes my kindergartner. Call it a sweet storm of surrender or a perfect storm of enough, but I was absolutely tired of watching kids like him tank. He had 9 out of what we call the 11 adverse childhood experiences, or ACEs, including family member incarceration, witnessing violence, watching his mother be abused, drug use, mental illness, physical and emotional neglect, and physical and emotional abuse. I had no idea where to start repairing his behavior. There was just so much need. Teaching him is like going to Vegas every day with all the money that you got. I'll take this behavior intervention for $500 and this positive reinforcement tool for $1,000. Oh, it worked. Oh my gosh, it worked. It's amazing. And then the next day we did the same things and nothing works. Flop. Why? Because children like Blue Eyes aren't problems to solve for us. They're emotional, reactive human beings. We can influence their behavior, but we need to be repairing what it is actually missing within them. That's secure attachment, deep connection to receive and give love. And that connection is created through what we call felt safety, not programs. Blue Eyes has disorganized attachment. His home life had been domestic violence, incarceration, drug use, mental illness, emotional neglect, and avoidantly attached safety. His body was in constant fight or flight, which daily threats to trigger me back into my own childhood and my own ambivalent, anxious attachment that I'd worked so hard to repair. If I'm not careful, I begin to take that behavior personally and fixate on his every move and base my worth, who I was as a teacher, on whether he was having a good day or not. His struggles with object permanence and object consistency, because he's just experienced so much inconsistency and unreliability by everyone that that was a caregiver to him. So thus it thwarts my ability to override his doubts and his insecurities. Children with insecure attachments didn't learn as infants, for example, that their mothers, when they leave the room, are going to stay the same and then they're going to return. So to these students, nothing is predictable or permanent except unpredictability. So he is predictably unpredictable. And every day I have to start out new. I was determined that I needed to be the consistent presence and love to help rewire his attachment system in his brain. Neuroscience has now proven to us that when we generate new neurons and connections, that will actually help heal those pathways that were inconsistent from our childhood. But it comes through repetitiveness and positive interactions. Attachment repair is not for the weak. And so most days with Blue Eyes, I felt like an emotional punching bag. But I wasn't there for the reassurance or happy feelings. He needed me. But he was ruthless. And in fact, he made it so easy not to like him. Does that remind you of anybody else? They make it so hard to love them. But that's why it's so helpful that those with wounds related to consistency get good experiences, more reassurance about commitment and permanence and reliability. So each time that he left for the day, he experienced departure stress, not knowing if I would be there when he returned and whether the new man, his dad, would actually keep him safe. He got overstimulated during centers and brain breaks and often overreacted to various moments. He danced too big and wouldn't participate if his peers were all of a sudden enthusiastic about something. He would sit back and do nothing. Then he would karate kick his way through the carpet excitedly while everybody else was calm and watch the other children run away from him in fear. Power is exhilarating to a child who feels helpless in other ways. Even though his behavior is screaming, "Go away!" But then if I would turn to leave them in PE, he would yell to me, "Where are you going?" Oddly, he could act kind and quickly articulate classroom rules and responsibilities, charming a stranger who entered our space. "Oh, that sweet little boy over there told me where to sit," they would tell me. And I would just want to roll my eyes. "Oh, he's so manipulative," my colleagues would say to me. And then someone would say, "Guess who's down at the office again?" after recess. But he was mine. He was my boy in a constant motion, as unpredictable as he was wonderfully confusing to me. And I knew that I was the answer. Fred Rogers said that little by little, we human beings are confronted with situations that give us more and more clues that we are just not perfect. But part of the journey is to recognize that we can do something with who we are and what we are in that moment. I didn't have to be completely well or have all the answers. I just had to be willing. So it's children like Blue Eyes that brought me to a place where I was just tired of watching teachers that I worked with emotionally bleeding out on kids. Brene Brown says, "Stop working your shit out on other people." And what happens is when we have not made peace with our own stories of harm and heartache, with our own developmental traumas, and let me define again what developmental trauma is. It's not just that you didn't receive what you needed, because people know that's what trauma is, right? Like you have experienced tremendous abuse or neglect and you deserved more than that. And I completely agree. But developmental trauma is you not getting enough of the good things you needed. So most of the time when I speak about developmental trauma, I have the people that get super defensive and they say, well, I had good parents. My parents tried the best job they knew how to do. Well, guess what? We all have limits, and we all have intergenerational trauma that keeps getting passed and passed and passed because nobody's wanting to take the time to heal it. Nobody wants to take the time to say, this really isn't healthy, or this really doesn't feel good, but yet we still keep perpetuating this cycle. We pass mental illness, we pass pedophilia, we pass all of these crappy things that we could at least really take a good hard look at it. But we also pass the ways that we respond and receive love. Developmental trauma is the places where you were belittled and ignored, shamed, ridiculed. They're the places where you were dismissed. I often explain it to people like this. Pretend that you had your sights set on that A team. There was an A and B team for, let's say, softball in elementary school. I remember this vividly. You want to be on the A team, right? And you don't make the cut. You're on the B team. And so most people would say, well, that's awesome. You get to play. You're still going to have a great time. You're going to learn about being a teammate. But guess what? All your friends got picked for A. So every day after school, when you go to practice, you watch all your friends go over to one place and you have to go over to the other. And I always felt like that place was full of all the geeks, the kids that still peed their pants. I felt like I was always kind of in that group, right? I did not see that as soul chiseling, amazing moments for my developmental progress. I just saw it as that sucks and I am less than. So let's say you go home and you're sad about it. It's hard. You feel ostracized. You feel unchosen. You feel like you are less than. And your mother gives you the talk of, well, what doesn't kill you makes you stronger. You're going to be fine. Buck up. You're going to be fine. And dismisses it. Doesn't really sit with you. Or maybe your dad did that. Right? Like they just dismiss it. They don't take the time. They don't give you enough of what you needed to make it through. And people would say, my God, that was like so many years ago. We need to get over it. But think of that as like a paper cut, right? Then the next time that you're ostracized or not picked, or the next time that someone says that you're less than, or they confirm it through something that happens to you, because now you have that wound that you're walking through and you're looking through as a child, you're going to look for ways that it's confirmed throughout your life. Not just that one moment, but it's like a collection of paper cuts, 10,000 paper cuts on your heart. And they're infected, right? Like they just continue to multiply. And they confirm that there's something wrong with us, developmentally wrong with us. So those of us with anxious attachment hustle for love. We'll do whatever it takes. We'll deny anything we need, whether it's, getting our needs met emotionally, physically, spiritually, whatever it is, just to stay in contact, to stay what we feel connected to someone else. Or as an avoidant, we're going to avoid and we're going to stay away from anything that seems emotionally scary, anything that seems emotionally vulnerable, anything that seems like someone would know a little bit more about us. We're going to just shy away from that. That is developmental trauma. And actually, friends, that actually can create CPTSD, which is complex post-traumatic stress. Over time, we start letting more and more shit into our lives. Toxic people, poor habits, we don't take good care of our bodies, right? So those adverse child experiences give us more checks in the box towards all of that adversity in our life, but it's also just emotionally not being well. And if we have that, and then we have our own children and we don't understand it, we can make some serious mistakes and we can repair them. I am a walking testimony of that. That's the good news. But we have to acknowledge that it existed at all. Some of my favorite things that I've learned from Dr. Dan Allender of the Allender Center in Seattle, which I highly recommend, is that stories matter. We are healed through our story, and we don't often have to have all the answers, like I said, but we need a witness. We need someone that will bear witness as we tell a story, or we are living a story, because we are a walking, living, breathing story. You have characters, you have plot, you have rising actions and falling actions, you have morals and themes, patterns, all those things that make up a good story is your life. And Allender would even go ahead and connect that to the gospel of God and how we are a reflection of that and we're telling the story of God. But going back, it's just a matter of understanding that life is a series of things that make up who we are. And so stories need to be named, they need to be acknowledged, they need to be acknowledged and articulated. So we tell them, they need to be pondered and reflected upon. And then we bless them through how we use them to make our lives make meaning. And for me, my developmental traumas have really given me a deeper view of how to connect with children. But if we are in an avoidant place where we don't want to acknowledge, name, ponder, reflect, or really self-reflect on our life and what made us who we are, it's going to be like a roadblock with a deeper connection to children. So as I began to integrate and go back and heal these places in my brain through therapy, through all the different kind of strategies that I will continue to share as long as there is breath in my body, through Simple and Deep, as well as any other ways that I communicate with the world, I was able to have more room for more freedom, more love, more acceptance, and what we call attunement, to be able to enter the emotional experiences of other people, not to feel it for them, but to experience it with them, to sit with them, to what we call contain. And it's not about having the answers. I just cannot say that more than a million times. I didn't have all the answers for Blue Eyes, but I was willing to keep showing up, willing to keep listening to what he wasn't telling me and what he was telling me, willing to mirror back what I saw, to remain curious. And that's what Mr. Rogers did so well for us. And that's why we have such a visceral reaction to him, because we felt seen, heard, and known through his attunement to the camera. As I've done my study through this process, as well as read his personal papers, I think it's really important that we recognize not only was Fred Rogers human, but he also had insecure attachment. He was avoidantly attached as a human being, and yet he used what he learned about attachment in the late 60s, early 70s to foster that connection for children through mass media, through television. So I think we have such an awesome opportunity to connect on a deeper level once we first go back and reconnect with the child we were. So the first key element of learning to love with attachment, attunement, and attention is to remember our childhood. If you do not remember your childhood, there are some great tools to do that. One of the great podcasts that I absolutely love is The Place We Find Ourselves by Ed.M, which I can link in the bio or the credits here. But he talks about some basic tools about going back and looking through photo albums, asking questions, listening to music from your childhood and seeing what it brings back, thinking about your bedroom as a child. I went on Pinterest and I literally looked up toys from the years that I was growing up and pinned them onto one board. As simple as that is, I always think that Pinterest became tremendous therapy for me, because I was able to not always look at everything, but I was able to categorize it into things like narcissistic abuse or things like attachment. What does attunement look like? And so that toy board became really cathartic for me as far as remembering the toys that mattered to me. And then as I remembered the toys, I was able to recall people that gave them to me, or being able to go to a friend's house when they had the Barbie van, or I have a friend who was just enamored with a Berenstain Bears treehouse that her friend had. as a child. So then there's, TV programs that you watch, cartoons on Saturday mornings. Of course, I was a child of the 80s. So, um, the being able to rent a VHS recorder and watching the never ending story like 13 times. So whatever your memories are, Pop Rocks and Clearly Canadians and Fruit Stripe Gum and, all of the things that made you you and were part of your childhood, I would go there because it's going to help trigger some of those things because memories are based in our body and they're lost in sensations and in our senses. And as we do that, we're activating empathy in our body. We're recognizing and remembering what it was like. Fred Rogers often said, we have to remember what it was like to not be able to see over the counter. Do you remember that? Maybe you need to get on your knees and look at your house that way. What would it be like to be little? What would it be like to not know what you know? Case in point, Band-Aids. I talk about this in the book. I know this is kind of all over the place, but I wanted to give you kind of an idea of this is the first step is to recognize what it felt like to be little if you want to connect with the child that you were. Because now through your life experience that you don't always die from a paper cut, right? But children don't. They see blood and it is absolutely terrifying. So I used to be like a horrible person when it came like the biggest Scrooge McDuck when it came to giving out Band-Aids. I'd be like, you're fine. It's not bleeding. Go to the end of the line. You're fine. Deal with it. But then as I worked with Fred Rogers' work, he talked about body integrity. As simple as this is, it was mind-blowing to me. So he talks about Band-Aids and how we make Band-Aids and all that sort of thing. And then he lifts the Band-Aid and he says, am I the same under the Band-Aid as I am on the top of the Band-Aid? Seems really simple. But then you think about the fact that they really don't know that they're going to heal under that Band-Aid. They might have had a couple experiences, but we're not making a lot of memories before a certain age, right? 5, 6, 7, 8 years old, where we start to finally remember certain things. Some of us have great memories from like 3, 4, but it's very spotchy because our brain is developing so fast. So I realized that the Band-Aid is a way of giving care and reassurance and attunement to make sure that they understand that they're going to be okay. A lot of us were left alone in stories, in moments where we needed more reassurance. Remember those good things that we didn't get enough of? We might have had some reassurance, but we might have just needed a little bit more. Have you ever had a moment where you thought, I just need a little bit longer and then I think I'll be okay? Just a little bit longer. And I'm not talking about hitting the snooze button in the morning for more sleep, but just a little bit longer before you go in and have a difficult conversation or you have to make a choice or a decision. You might take that extra minute in your car to take a deep breath. So I want us to think about attuning and being present in moments where we just needed a little bit more and looking for the ways we can give that to ourselves as we learn how to reparent. But also, that is why the Band-Aid matters. And so, as we go back through our stories in simple and deep ways, that is about coming up to ourselves and asking ourselves, where do I need some Band-Aids? Where do I need to go back as my wise adult self and tell myself as a child, you survived this, but there might be places where we need to acknowledge to ourselves, you needed more. And I am so sorry that happened. I'm so sorry that you were left alone with that. Case in point, we're going to talk a little bit more about story work as we go on in this new season of the podcast. But there are many unvoiced stories within us. Maya Angelou talks about that there's no greater burden than having an unvoiced, untold story within us. And many of us are full of stories. And the best way to get the stories out are to write them, because it does a whole bunch of stuff in our brain when we actually put pen to paper. The Allender Center talks a lot about that. And I think it's tremendously helpful and beneficial. And I've heard so many people say, oh, I could never journal. It's just so much work. But you could word process it, couldn't you? Right? But I would encourage you to think of a story that that you could write out. And I want you to try to activate all of your senses. So what did your bedspread look like in your bedroom? What was on the walls? What did it smell like? What did it sound like? One of my friends talked about a story of just being about 7 or 8 and going outside and swimming, and what songs were on the radio in their backyard pool, and the smell of sunblock and how the sun felt on her skin. And every time we activate that, it actually helps us go deeper into the story and be present. And this isn't about re-traumatizing ourselves. It's about telling ourselves the truth. And I will be sharing in the next podcast about why I became a teacher, because there was a time where I would say in the last, I'd say 5, 6 years, where I really didn't know why. I knew I loved it. I knew I was good at it, but I didn't know why I'd become a teacher. Many people have that kind of Oprah Winfrey moment of like, this teacher changed my life, rah, rah. And I have a handful of people that did teach me that I am absolutely indebted to. But that isn't why I became a teacher. So the reason I'm telling you that is because how I became a teacher and when I became a teacher and why I became a teacher was locked in a story that I needed to name, that I needed to articulate, that I needed to ponder, and that I needed to bless. And it is through stories that we were able to come to a deeper understanding of who we are, but it's how we reach children like Blue Eyes. And his story just started at the beginning of the book, and he's woven out through the tapestry of the entire narrative, but he's still in my life. He's going to be a 5th grader this year, and this book is dedicated to him. And he was one of the first people that I handed an advanced copy to and said, I wrote this because I love you. And he's often said to people, I don't know why she loves me so much. And that's when I know that something is working, because we don't give love to people who always deserve it. We give love because we choose it. And not because we are being martyrs, but because we're choosing to be hope. But there are people who are hurting us that we need to learn how to let go of so that we can love ourselves first. So if you can hear this, 1, story is how we heal. 2, it's going to take some work. And 3, you're going to have to love yourself before you can love anybody else fully. If you are struggling with loving another person, you need to look deeper within yourself and ask yourself, what would someone who really loves herself do right now? It's a journey. That brings us to the end of this episode, but I am so incredibly grateful that you were here to spend this time with me. As always, I am available for any questions you might have at wysteriaedwards.com, as well as on all the social media platforms. And don't forget to check out Waiting for Mr. Rogers, now available on any place that books are sold. I look forward to our next time together. Take care.